Hello, you lovely people, and welcome back to Sabbatical Stories. I'm your host, Bex Thomas, and I'm still in the lovely Lyme Regis, which is perfect, because once again I'm joined by an old friend who also grew up here. Liz and I go way back to the first year of high school. Through life's twists and turns, we lost touch once we left school, but reunited when we both, unrelatably, emigrated to Sydney. I set up this podcast to inspire courage and normalise taking a break from your career. And I would love it if you could help too, by subscribing, liking and rating the show. It really would mean a lot. I hope you enjoy this episode of two friends catching up and sharing career break stories. We explore why we both love travel, why Liz's perception of who she wanted the 40-year-old version of her to be led her to emigrate, tips on how to get the best out of travelling with your partner, and how leaning into what you enjoy and find flow in leads to a way better outcome than doing what you think you should do on a sabbatical. Deep down, you've tried, dig deep, search wide, enjoy your climb, it's all for you. Good afternoon, Liz, and welcome to Sabbatical Stories. Thank you so much for your time today and agreeing to share your story. And as it's exactly that, your story, who better to introduce yourself than you? So first off, can you give us a little bit of insight into who Liz Ferguson is and a backdrop to your sabbatical story, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am Liz Ferguson, and my sabbatical story is very much a stop-start kind of story, really. I think I've probably had 3 sabbaticals, and each time have ended up working like much sooner than anticipated. So I'm fascinated by this topic. I'm really excited to share my story, hear more about yours, Bex, and hear more about the other guests that you have on, and see if I can pick up some tips so that next time I take a break, I actually take a break.
So you mentioned you've got 3. Just give us a little snapshot of each 3.
So the first time I took a break from work was sort of from choice. So I manipulated myself into voluntary redundancy from a job, and I was really young. I was in my 20s, and I thought that I might set myself up as a consultant and freelance and work as a contractor across some of my interest areas. But I needed money. I didn't have any income, and I didn't know how to be a contractor. I hadn't been in the professional world long enough to make contacts or really understand how that worked. So I ended up going back to work and starting work for a tech startup back in the dot-com era. The second time I took a 12-week break between moving from the UK to Australia, and that was really a 12-week break and a negotiated break with the company that I was working for, who I was still going to be working for when I finally settled down in Australia. And that was really all about travel with my then boyfriend, now husband. And the third break was a choice. I was heading up a company in Australia, and I didn't think that it was going to work for lots of reasons. And so I stepped away from that and decided to start my own business, and was expecting to take 6 months off and to not have any work coming through my own business for a good length of time, but actually got my first client within 3 months and couldn't not work during that time. I was sort of setting up my website and I don't know, doing all sorts of other bits and pieces around brand and that sort of thing, even though I should have just been lying at the beach with a book. But it turns out sometimes I'm not very good at that.
It's funny you say that, isn't it? So you mentioned should there in that break. What was it that made you feel like you should have taken a break and not been exploring your own business or starting to think about that? What was the sort of trigger that made you think you probably should have had a break?
Truthfully, having got very tired and very emotionally involved with the company that I was working for at the time, I really thought I needed a break where I did little to nothing and cared about my well-being, and I thought I was going to learn to cook and be a domestic goddess and all these other things. But actually, I really enjoyed figuring out the brand for my own consultancy business, and I enjoyed, well, you know that I enjoy figuring out tech, so figuring out how to set up my website and designing that myself and getting friends involved to design a logo for me and things like that was just more fun to me than resting.
And who's to say what rest is, right? I think the beauty of that story is around actually
it's so unique to us of what, you know, gets us in the flow or is fun to us. So it's this whole kind of myth busting around this is what you should do on your break, rather than actually what maybe you need to do or what you find yourself doing that is actually fun. And they say, don't they, a change is as good as a rest sometimes. So you mentioned the first break. How long was that?
I think I only managed maybe 3 weeks before I got a temp job.
Okay, so 3 weeks the first break, and then
Yeah.
the second break 12 months, and sounds
12
pretty
weeks.
intentional between...
Yeah.
12 weeks, and sounds pretty intentional between moving countries. And then the third break around 12 weeks?
About the same, probably, yeah.
So talk us through your travel. What did you get up to? How did you prepare for that? And what did that period of time look like?
So I hadn't travelled very much at that point, and I hadn't travelled outside of Europe, aside from a couple of trips to the States, to city breaks in the US. And so, because Australia is so far from the UK, you can go anywhere in the world between the UK and Australia. And we decided that it would be fun to travel as part of Asia on the way out. So we did top to bottom of Vietnam, through Cambodia, bottom to top of Laos, and then into the north of Thailand, and then across to Queensland, actually, for a little mini break with some friends who were living there.
Amazing. And what was your highlight?
It's a really interesting one, because as I was travelling, everything felt new. I'd never been to Asia. We landed in Hanoi. It was very loud, scooters everywhere. It smells different. Everything's different. You know, crossing the road is a hazard. It was all very exciting. We went from Hanoi to Halong Bay, and Halong Bay is one of the most beautiful places I've ever seen, and still is one of the most beautiful places I've ever seen. And at the time I thought to myself, well, this can't already be a highlight, because this is the first place that I'm in, so it can't be. Surely there's places all over Asia that are just as beautiful, and of course there are, but Halong Bay is still really special. I really think it's one of the most beautiful places on earth.
It's funny, isn't it? Because I think it also comes down to timing as well. I remember being a 21-year-old backpacker and having never really travelled. Very similar, had travelled to Europe, but not anywhere with such a huge culture shock as Asia. And I remember standing over a sort of flyover in Bangkok and watching all of the taxis and the scooters and the chaos beneath me, and just thinking, holy crap, like, oh my goodness. And for me, technically it wasn't beautiful. It's not a beautiful, but it is a absolute vivid picture that sticks in my mind, that life will never be the same again.
Yeah.
You know, like you've sort of, I don't know, transitioned into a different sort of space and world, and how much more is out there. It's why I absolutely love travelling.
Yeah, I think I felt the same in Hanoi. I wasn't sure I liked it in the first instance. I just thought, what am I doing? And we asked the hotel receptionists to recommend us somewhere to eat that was close to the hotel, because whatever the timings of the flights were, it was getting on to be quite late. And they gave us the name of the restaurant, and they wrote it out, and they pointed to it on a map and drew it out for us. And it was just round the corner. But the noise of the scooters and seeing people with their worldly goods all piled up on the back of these scooters around, and there was chickens in the street, and there was people squatting in the street, and bicycles everywhere. And it was such a massive culture shock for me. And I was 30 at that point. Like, it wasn't me discovering the world as a kid. This was a whole new experience for me. You know, I didn't have a gap year. I didn't travel a lot when I was younger. I didn't have disposable income to be able to do any of those things. So it was such a massive experience for me. And in the moment, I wasn't sure if I liked it. But when now I look back at it, I just think, wow, how exciting that I had the opportunity to do that, and to have the opportunity to do that knowing that I was moving to another country and was going to have all these other experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. And moving to a different country, just probably off topic slightly, but what was the motivation there? Why did you and your husband decide to move?
So there's a number of driving factors. I had this thing when I was in my 20s that I thought that I knew what sort of 40-year-old I wanted to be, and I wanted to get to 40 and have lots of stories to tell. And travel, you've always got something in common with people if you've travelled to the same places or had travel experiences. So I wanted to be a really interesting adult. So living in another country and travelling for me sort of helped me build those stories, and new experiences that I could try and test would build these stories. I don't know why I thought that it had to all be done before I was 40, I'll be honest, but that's how the youth think, isn't it? That's how we think when we're young.
It's because we thought 40 was old.
I know. And I'm 44 now, and I do think it's old, but there's still so much to do. So that was a really big motivation for me. And the other thing that we talked about a lot at the time, myself and my partner, was that to not experience another country, and for London to be our only place of work, we didn't feel was going to be particularly good for us. London's very tiring, and we were very tired. We were sort of in a point in our careers where we were scrambling up the ladder and trying to get promoted and trying to get pay rises and things. And the commute in and out of London is brutal. Always has been, always will be, because so few of us can live in the centre. And we spent a lot of time with a lot of friends at the time who really seemed to be unhappy in what they were doing and the situation that they had got themselves in. And so we just found ourselves saying, well, we can't be like that. We just, if we really don't like our situation, we should just change it. So we just changed it and decided to try living in another country.
But why Australia, Liz?
We had been there before. So you and my husband had been travelling straight after university and had stopped in Australia to live and work in Sydney for some time. And I went out to visit. I spent my student loan on going out to Sydney for the millennium to watch the fireworks with my then boyfriend, thankfully now husband. So it was obviously worth it, wasn't it?
Good investment.
Absolutely, yeah. And we just loved it. We just really liked Australia, and Ewan had worked there for 2 or 3 months as well, and liked the work culture. Liked how open and sort of friendly people seemed to be, especially in the workplace, was something that he quite liked. So we thought that, well, neither of us speak another language. We wanted to experience living in another country, and we thought that we would give Australia a try. So we both spoke to our companies. He also was sponsored to travel across and work for his company at the time. And it's one of those instances of sort of putting your desires out into the universe and actually people just saying yes to you. It really happened to us, from the decision of moving to Australia to actually happening. It took us about 9 months to plan and get it together, but in that time it gave both of our companies the comfort, I suppose, to go with us on that and to help support us on that. So yeah, I think the lack of language barrier and the physical beauty of Sydney as well.
It's a very easy city, isn't it? It's such a magical, beautiful place. And what you've got is you've got the city and the CBD, as well as the beach and, the mountains so close and everything. It's a beautiful city. So you mentioned that, and I love this fact of looking at future 40-year-old you and really imagining, what sort of 40-year-old you want to be, because it's actually something that I do a lot of work with my clients on, around future them, and how a career break or a sabbatical actually then almost defines the next chapter. And we always look at future you. What would future you advise, or what would future you really be proud of, and how do you sort of achieve that, and how do you get there? So I love that your motivations were built on almost, fast forwarding to 40-year-old Liz and sort of saying, okay, what would make our life feel fulfilled, and what do we want to be in that 40 years old, and how are we going to get there?
It's funny that I thought that I'd be somebody who would be sitting and telling stories and regaling people with these stories that I have from my life, because actually I don't really need people around me, and I sort of now just do it because I want to experience it, not because I want to tell other people about it. So it's funny to me that in my youth I thought that I was going to be somebody who was wildly more sociable than I actually am. But
is it not your story? It's for you, isn't it, as well? These are stories for you, and they're memories for you and your husband to have and to be able to reminisce on, and have those lived shared experiences which travel and moving to a different country so gives us.
Yeah, absolutely.
What were the challenges of traveling with a partner?
Many.
Because I can imagine that's very different than sort of having a career break or traveling on your own.
Yeah, it was. There were some things that were really good about doing it in a couple, and as you say, building those shared experiences together was really just lovely, and has become a really important part of our partnership and our relationship. It was challenging. I'll say that. I mean, the other really challenging thing about it is that we'd never spent that much time, just the two of us. We'd never spent more than maybe a weekend away, or I think we'd travelled Italy for 10 days together a couple of years before we moved to Australia, but we'd never spent that much time in each other's company. And when you're independent people, as we are, 3 months of just having that one person to talk to, I think that was probably the biggest challenge.
What sort of strategies would you advise the listeners on if they were embarking on a break of an extended period of time with a partner? Because you make a really good point. How often do we ever spend 24/7 in each other's companies?
But that person being your go-to for 3 months, and that being the sole place of conversation for part of your travels is really intense. So I think being able to take breaks from each other is a good thing, even if that's just going to read a book and having quiet time, or listening to a podcast, or whatever it is that you want to do. The other thing that was really great for us was making sure that we socialised with others when we were travelling, and some of our favourite memories are of sitting around and drinking rice wine with some Norwegians we made friends with in Laos. Just some really fun stories. And then, of course, with travel at the centre of this break, we all had travel stories that we could share. So it was very easy to find something in common with other people, because you either travelled from the same place or you were travelling to somewhere that they had already been. And that's the great thing about travel, isn't it? And socialising when you're travelling is picking up all these tips from people on the way.
Yeah, absolutely. The stories, I actually run monthly connection circles, and they're for individuals who are travelling or on a sabbatical and a career break. And one of the big things I think sometimes is, even if you're travelling with a partner, it can sometimes feel a bit lonely if you're on a break or travelling. And the wonderful thing about these connection circles is 9 times out of 10 it is travel stories that we connect on, because if travel is part of that break, there's such a common thread through it all, and the beautiful stories that come up, it's gorgeous. So look, with regards to that break, obviously the sort of pre-Liz and the post-Liz were majorly different, right? Because you're moving countries, you're with the same company but essentially moving roles. What was the biggest difference or takeaway that 3 months gave you, if you think about pre-break Liz and post-break Liz?
It really gave me a sense of perspective, lifting myself up out of a day-to-day experience that in those days we had to go and work in an office 5 days a week, Begs.
Wow.
We had to get on a train.
How did we ever do it, huh?
I know. Like, it really felt repetitive, and my personality type is that I don't love repetition or order or routine. I have a visceral reaction to doing the same thing day in, day out. It very much upsets my energies, if we want to go a little bit hippie about it, but I've gone there. It really does. And so lifting myself up out of that life and showing myself that actually I have probably had more choices in how I spent my time than I really had imagined. I think a lot of us go through school, go into university, get a job, try and climb the ladder, try and be good at work, and hopefully try and find some satisfaction there. But for me, knowing and understanding that there's a whole big wide world out there, and also a choice in how I spend my time, that was definitely really valuable for me. And then when we got to Sydney, it felt like we were having a bit of a break from being adults, to be honest, because we had also sort of followed the social norms of buying a house in the UK. When we got to Sydney, we were in a rental in Darling Harbour, managed to get a great rental with a great view of the city. And it really felt like we were just having a break from having to make so many micro decisions every day, and that also freed up our minds to really, again, think about our choices and think about the lives that we might want to live.
And so how did then you integrate these lessons or learns from that 3 months into life? You talked about it giving you a real insight into having choices of how to spend your time. How did that sort of impact then life after the break?
Yeah, I think I'm still quite driven by work and have had a full-time job for most of my adult life. So I did go back into that. But I think Sydney actually gives you an opportunity to think about things a little bit differently, in that it's not the same working culture as London. You're not sitting watching the clock and waiting for your boss to leave. You don't have to work. You don't have to show up and be in the office 8 till 7 or whatever it is. Actually, the Sydney work culture and office culture in general means that you can do a day's work and then leave, and that's really respected. I think your time outside of work is respected.
And how have you ensured that those lessons learnt through the 12 years in Australia have seen you through coming back and integrating back into the London lifestyle?
I'm not sure if I've always been really blunt and honest, or if this was something that I learned in Australia, because I seem to just be able to get away with calling things out. If I see bad behaviour or experience behaviour that's not part of how I want to be or how I want to live, I will just say I'm not doing that. I'm not prepared to do that. So, you know, there are a few people who I'm working with at the moment, and I'm working for an international company, so the opportunity to work is 24/7. It's there if I wanted to. And there are people who I work with who will work different hours, will work very late in the evening and be on email. And I'm not prepared to do that. That's not where I am in my life or my career. I don't know, I feel like just being honest and open and transparent about your barriers and you know, all the things that I've learned seems to be working for me right now.
I feel similar to yourself, and I have assumed it's age, and that you know, we get to a point where we sort of go, do you know what, we're so comfortable, or I certainly feel more comfortable in my own skin now than I did say 10-15 years ago, and I wonder if that's it. But you bring a different perspective to it as well, about the Australian and a different culture, and I wonder if that has helped us. They're so much less formal in Australia, and they are so much better at us Brits with those boundaries. So I wonder whether that is partly it as well. Going back to your sabbatical, where you were travelling, what sort of things did you implement, or any sort of tricks or tips that you use to maintain balance? Because I know there can be a myth around this whole, oh, it's going to be amazing and we're going to have such a relaxing 3 months, but actually when the full-on travel hits and you're moving from place to place and you're taking in all these amazing experiences and everything, balance sometimes can be a little bit difficult. Were there any sort of things that you used as tools to sort of really ensure that balance?
I'd love to say that there was, but I think we were both, you know, we weren't very good at travelling actually. We were moving on a lot, and the first part of our trip was quite planned. We had quite a I'd say quite a planned out itinerary for the Vietnam leg, and we had trains that we were trying to make and that sort of thing. Well, you cannot do that in Cambodia, and at the time, well, you couldn't at the time in Cambodia and Laos. The bus comes when it comes. It arrives in its destination when it arrives in its destination, having picked up 100 people and their chickens on the way. So actually it forced us into being more flexible with our itinerary, and we started to build in time to just be still. So the islands at the bottom of Laos, I won't say they're called 4,000 islands, but that sounds too many. Some number of islands. I should remember, because it was one of the best parts of our trip, but we decided that we'd be there for, I think we were there for 5 days, which was quite a long time. You know, an itinerary that was covering 4 countries in 12 weeks. And that was great. So really being still, having time to do the bike ride, having time to meet people, chat around rice wine, and, you know, just have a bit more of a party and a bit more of a holiday section to the travel, I guess.
Certainly patience and sort of working through ambiguity are 2 key life lessons, aren't they, that travel teaches you for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. You just have to go with it sometimes. There were some stressful moments. We arrived in Takek and the hotel we were meant to be staying in was closed because the bus was so late, and we're trying to figure out how we were going to get a bed for the night. But I can't even remember how it worked out, but it all worked out in the end.
Yeah.
And we're planning a trip to Croatia, and at least 3 nights of that's only 10 days, but 3 days of that will be just holiday. And having a break from that constant movement and constant planning and having to find somewhere to stay and having to find somewhere to eat, taking some of those decisions out of the day for a few days.
It's really interesting because you talk about having time to just chill, and when I'm working with individuals on sabbatical or career break coaching, we always talk about a decompression or learning phase, which normally comes at the end or sometimes as sort of almost a bit of a chapter interlude throughout different versions of their break. And that very much is to ensure balance, but also to really reflect and have that time to be able to reflect over what you've learned and any sort of aha moments that have come through that specific chapter. We've talked quite a lot about your travelling sabbaticals, so just fast forward to your career break that you took intentionally after leaving a company and then sort of setting up on your own, knowing that you were going to leave and you were ideally taking 6 months off, but it didn't quite work like that because your business flourished much quicker than you expected. How did you, and what sort of things did you do to plan for that anticipated break at that point?
As much as it was my decision to leave the company, I think the only planning was that I thought, if I leave, I need something else to do. So what is it that I can do? What are my skills? What's my experience? And is there a gap in the market for what I have? And the answer to all of those things was yes, actually, I can consult on digital content, digital audiences to all manner of people and companies, small businesses, large businesses, individuals. And so that was really the only plan. And I was in a very fortunate position where I didn't have to earn money straight away. Aside from really trying to, I guess, assess my own skills and experience and where that might be useful and what might people pay me for, the rest of the plan was really around just taking a break and figuring out what that looked like. So I guess the break was to try to figure out whether that business would work, what that business looked like, could I do it, should I do it? But again, all of the answers ended up being yes, and then I ended up with a client.
The intention was to explore whether this could be something that worked. What sort of things did you do to come to all of the answers being yes?
Well, I started with some of the stuff that I find super fun, that I know I've learned that others don't. Really, it started out with needing to understand what my brand was, but not what it looked like as much as how it felt. And my brand, it was really important to me that it was around rising up above the noise and being a grown-up and being a trusted advisor, but in a super positive, happy way, and that all the partnerships or collaborations I might have would have this type of energy and feeling where I could bring clarity, but it would be through a positive light.
In what ways did that sabbatical, would you say, contribute to your personal growth and development, like both personally and professionally?
Yeah, massively. Because the work that I did on trying to figure out how my business might feel was actually work that I was doing on myself, because I was the only operative in the business. It was me. I was setting myself up as an independent consultant. So I was actually doing quite a lot of investigation around my personality and the things that I like and dislike. And by trying to work on the feeling and conjuring up this feeling, actually what I was doing was almost by accident figuring out a kind of blueprint for the way that I want to move through this world and through life. I ended up working with a now very close friend, then colleague, who has a word of the year, just as a sort of a motto for the year. And I've been doing that for the last 3 or 4 years, and they always involve lightness or something to do with the sky or being bright or just not heavy and weighed down. And so I think unintentionally doing that work on my business idea and the goals around the business, really ultimately what I was doing was trying to figure out, what is it inside me that I need to, how do I need to feel as I move through this world, I suppose.
I love the word of the year. I can never quite stick to one.
I haven't been able to stick to one word for the last 2 years, actually. And this year, I started the year with the word present because I wanted to be very present. We made a lot of decisions, did a lot of stuff last year, a lot of change, and I just wanted to be present to enjoy it. And that just didn't feel like it was right for me, and so I changed it already in February to firework. I want to be a firework.
Oh, wow.
I want to be
Why not?
cruising through the air. I want to be leaving a trail of sparkliness behind me in my wake as I travel through the world this year.
Is there one thing that you wish you'd known at the beginning or sort of before you started that sabbatical, and maybe something you'd have maybe done differently?
Had I known the power of my own network, I probably would have given myself a bit more of that break. I probably would have done a few more of the long walks, or spent full days at the beach, or found myself in nature without a laptop or a notebook a little bit more.
And very easy to say in hindsight, right, when we know that things have worked out, but sometimes a little more challenging when you're in it and being able to trust in the process. But look, that brings us on to my final question, which I always like to end my podcast to our listeners and anybody thinking about taking a break or about to embark on one. What would your top 3 tips be to them?
Number 1 would be to consider how long you might want the break to be, and make sure that the financial side of things isn't going to be too stressful for you. And the reason I say that is from the 2 breaks that I've had, where I've stopped those breaks early because I was worried about getting paid and needing to get paid and needing to know where that money is coming from. So to the extent that that's available to you, I think trying to build some sort of cushion so that you can really take a proper break and not be stressed about that. Yeah, number 2, I would recommend doing a bit of work on yourself and whatever that means to you. So I'm a big advocate for seeking professional help and seeing a psychologist or getting some psychology help. And my reason for saying that and being quite upfront about that is that I very often see friends and family taking breaks because they want to get away from something, or they want to stop something that they're feeling, or something that's negative that's happening in their lives. And I think starting a break, having already done that work, to not be running away from something, but being very intentional about taking a break because you want to take a break. And the third one, make sure that you're leaving lots of time to just have fun. How do you bring as much joy and fun into what you're doing as possible?
Brilliant. Well, look, thank you ever so much for your time. It's been wonderful. And until the next time, thank you and lots of love.
Appreciate your situation. Let's try to keep this real. And it's like she said.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Sabbatical Stories. I really appreciate each and every one of you taking the time to join us. Thanks to Liz for sharing her sabbatical story, one that emphasises how the decisions you make today really does define future you. If you want to get in touch with Liz, her LinkedIn profile will be in the show notes below. Thank you as always to Auntie B at the Flaxon, my patient and amazingly talented producer. I also want to give a special shout out to the incredibly talented Joanna Cook, whose soulful blend of smooth vocals we're lucky enough to use throughout the show. If you are interested in sharing your story on Sabbatical Stories, please get in touch. Send me a message on Instagram, sabbatical_stories, or find me at Rebecca Thomas on LinkedIn. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd really appreciate it if you could subscribe, like and rate the show. It would really mean a lot to me. And also, if you think a friend might like this episode, buzz it over to them. After all, sharing is caring. Until the next time, take care and dream big.
Tendencies and determination may well bring countless words of the bandits feel that bow in strings, and a heart full of soul it's connected, and I'm moving along. I won't let it all turn the other cheek, show them your smile. You won't believe things for a while, taking matters into your own hands. You won't believe that you're making